Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out Regular Revenge. Story 1. No balcony, no grass. Posted here because it would get removed from r/petty revenge. 3 years ago the balcony railings in my apartment building had to be replaced. This involved locking us out of the balconies obviously. Not a big deal, hey it's a couple weeks right? Nope. They got the absolutely cheapest crew they could and couldn't be bothered to source the railing beforehand, so we were locked in our apartments for over a year. Including during a heatwave, and they still charged us for using window air conditioners. What triggered my revenge is, the balconies were mostly done except my column. Why? Because the super lives on the ground floor below me and decided now is the perfect time to build himself a new backyard, and hold up construction, which left me locked in for another 2 weeks as they built fences and laid out lovely new green sod. Ever since I have been nicking a bag of sidewalk salt from the building's storage bins, i.e. his salt, each winter, and throwing few handfuls of it into his yard every night when spring comes around. I enjoy hearing him wondering out loud why nothing grows in his yard and his wife yell at him for using too much fertilizer. It's probably got the salinity of the Dead Sea by now. Story 2. My parents achieved nothing in life. I beg to differ. I live in Ireland and you could say that college education only came in the 60s. Before this most people were poor or immigrated. Society was almost two-tiered where local businessmen, doctors, and teachers were elites and had all the power and sway in their area. My father was born around this time, however he was kept at home to continue the small family farm and his siblings went to college. My community is rural, so there is no college jobs around here besides teacher and doctor. As a result, the community is still pretty much the same as the 60s. The two-tiered system still exists as I said above. My mother is a Sam and my father still farms and works full-time as well. This annoys my parents as they are often looked down on. My father's siblings think they are better than them, and when they visit my grandparents living in the area they are a bit supercilious. They often go on about their children and think they know more about education than my parents. My community is the same in terms of some people feel too big to be friendly to my parents. Anyway, here is the revenge. My mother is very intelligent, but her parents didn't believe in education at the time, so she didn't go to college. My father is average enough intelligence and no one had any expectations of my mother. As the story goes, I am gifted intelligent. My parents always had high expectations of me and worked hard on my education and gave me every opportunity they could. My father's family were always smug about their own children being smarter, but in reality I was a dark horse. Long story short, I became a doctor. In fact, I was the only person to ever become a doctor from my parish. It was a shock to everyone and suddenly everyone began treating us better. However, one day at my grandparents' the whole family was gathered and the chance finally came to put things right. Someone commented OP is without a doubt the highest achiever in the family despite the fact his parents never left the ashes. Still think you are better than my parents? As quick as a flash I answered, well, I suppose it is an incredible achievement. However, I don't think it's fair to say I achieved it. A child's education is actually their parents' achievement. It was my parents that made this happen and I agree their achievement is phenomenal. If only I could achieve half as much as to have my child become a doctor, it would be phenomenal. I suppose the main goal of every generation though is to have their children do better than them. This hit them hard as it completely discredited their own degrees and gave the credit to my grandparents, who they sometimes patronized too. Also, their own children will only end up with an education on par with their own, so it's not really bettering them. My grandparents and parents said afterwards it was the perfect response and gave them the justice they deserved after years of snide treatment. So, there you have it. I know it's not that exciting, but who doesn't love a story where the underdog rises higher than the top dogs? I suppose there is also a good lesson in this story too. Remember where you come from and never underestimate someone's potential. It is important not to be carried away with status. Personally, as one of the new elites, it is a chance for me to give justice to my community. The power within the community and committees are made up of the big people and people sucking up to them. The teachers won't be too happy when I disregard their opinions for the brilliant ideas of the people they view as stupid. And most important, no one will ever look down on my parents again, winky face. Story 3. Cheat on me, you take the high road, I choose revenge. I met my ex in 2012, right after he turned 20 and I had just turned 30. I had only dated and been with women exclusively until I came out as bisexual at 28. Let's just say the year I was 29 was a busy year making up for what I missed out on. It was mostly casual hookups, yes, safe, and I did try dating 2 different guys for a few weeks, but it just never worked out or got serious. I kind of figured that I'd probably end up marrying a woman or not getting married at all because I just didn't see myself catching romantic and sexual feelings for a guy. Then I met Ryan. From the first date it was just like the only other time in my life I had fallen in love. Butterflies, constantly thinking about him, wanting to spend every moment with him. He fell for me hard too and we became an item, though he did say while he considered my bisexuality a turn-on, because he had a thing for straight guys, it also gave him pause because of my desires for the opposite sex and his concern it may lead me astray. I thought about it and understood it was a legitimate worry, but assured him that I couldn't even think about anyone else because I was really into him. Note, I knew he was the one by the end of the first month and I was in love, but I wasn't going to say these things too soon and risk scaring him off. On our first date he admitted to me that he was legally blind due to a genetic disorder and that it was progressive and eventually he would only have a sliver of his peripheral vision. He immediately said he understood if I didn't want to see him again because no other guy had wanted to date him and be his driver all of the time. I grew up with a brother in a wheelchair who never learned how to walk or talk due to misdiagnosed meningitis at 6 months old back in the 70s. I told him that and said that what my brother had was a severe disability, so in my perspective, his blindness had no effect in my feelings and that always being the driver was a small sacrifice just to be with him. The next 3 years were bliss. We brought out the best in each other. My family, who was surprised, but very supportive when I came out, adored Ryan and treated him like family and said that I acted happier since we'd been together. When I met him he was working part-time in retail and had done very poorly in high school because he lost a lot of his confidence as his vision deteriorated. I told him that one thing I did insist on was that he do something with his life because he had too much to offer and that I would help. He said that he'd wanted to be a teacher but didn't think someone with limited vision could teach. Nonsense. So I put him through community college for 2 years, then 2.5 years of a local university and finally the 1-year teacher certification program as required by California. I drove countless miles and paid hundreds in public transportation costs for him, never blinking an eye or complaining. We'd been together for 7.5 years and were engaged to be married in October by the time he was in his last semester of his teaching certification, which involved him student teaching at his former high school with his favorite teacher from his days in school. Then the pandemic hit and schools closed. Fortunately he'd had enough hours in the classroom that he would still qualify to be certified after the governor issued a waiver via executive order. On the 3rd day of the stay-at-home order in March my life crumbled when I innocently found out he had cheated on me with an ex, all because he handed his phone to me to show me something on Instagram. I accidentally fat-thumbed the back arrow when he gave it to me, taking me back to a list of all his messages. I looked and recognized the name of his ex as the second message, dated a week ago. I clicked on it and my heart sank. Directions to my house, pictures, dirty talk, and reassuring him not to worry about me because he had my location on my Find My Friends, just in case I came home from work. I immediately started screaming, demanding to know everything, and he admitted to having his ex over twice for sex and that they didn't use protection. His ex was engaged to his GF during this, adding another victim. Then he admitted to sleeping with his straight but curious recently single cousin, by marriage, twice, again no protection. Finally he admitted to sleeping with a supposedly straight guy he and many of my cousins went to school with, who I told Ryan I really didn't like him or want them talking because I didn't trust him. Since they were never close friends I didn't feel like this was a big sacrifice or that I was being too controlling, and I assumed that he knew why I, and all my cousins, felt that way, but didn't bother repeating it. The reason was after high school at age 20 this guy was convicted of sexual assault and penetration with a foreign object against a 16-year-old girl and had gone to jail and required to register as a sex offender for life. Apparently my ex was the only person in his graduating class that hadn't heard that news. All of this happened in my home while I was working. We spent the whole weekend crying with me asking over and over why and him repeatedly crying and saying he just didn't know and that he felt terrible. Monday comes around and anger started being as common as sadness and I made a comment that said I was going to pull all the phone records going back the 3 years that AT&T kept them, for a fee. Only when he heard that did he admit to one more guy. Some random named Frankie off the gay hookup app Grindr who was the first guy he cheated with and continued to casually hook up with for nearly 2 years with the last time being in February, the month before. He told me how it started. Get this, it was the day after his graduation with his BA in May 2018 and he was drunk from celebrating and wanted to have sex. I too had been celebrating with him and said I was too drunk to perform and said I'd make it up the next day, then passed out asleep on the couch. Apparently he was angry horny because he downloaded Grindr, chatted with this Frankie fellow and arranged to have sex in his car in a church parking lot across the street from our condo, which happens to be across the street from a school. This fact is important later, all while I slept on the couch. All the times they hooked up after that was again in my condo while I was working or visiting a friend for the night up the coast. He used to love going but started saying he couldn't occasionally because of homework and studying. I absolutely lost it, told him to get in the car and I drove him to his family's house so he could tell them what he did so they understood why he was moving back into their house. While he was in the house I was in the driveway on the phone with AT&T ordering the 3 years worth of detailed call/text logs, then made an appointment to be screened for STIs. I also changed his number, he'd had it for years, but I took it over and added it to my plan 2 to 3 before because his parents were tired of paying it, then suspended his service, deleted his social media and changed all his passwords so only I would have access to his cloud. I also called the bank and issued a stop payment on his final tuition check that I had sent to the certification program the week before and hadn't hit the bank yet. Before deleting his social media, except Facebook, I took screenshots of the entire Instagram conversation with his ex and mailed the conversation to his fiancée, who deserved to know so she could see a doctor too. His family was very religious and had kicked him out in high school for 3 days when he tried to admit he was bi and only took him back in when he took it back. Needless to say, she ended it, he got kicked out. 1 down. He came back out to the car and we went home. I took his house key and told him to say goodbye to our 3 pets and get packing. The entire time he packed I studied those phone records to find out dates, times and if there was anyone else he was leaving out. He answered every question I asked and it was then that I discovered that the sex offender and he had only had oral sex in my home and that the actual sex was in the same parking lot he screwed the Frankie guy in. The wheels started turning and the next day I went over there and sure enough spotted a camera. I spoke to a secretary at the church and informed them about a registered sex offender having sex in their lot and that not only was it a violation of his parole for indecent exposure, but that he was not allowed to be that close to a school and I provided the date. I was in luck. They had a digital 2-year loop system that started deleting day by day after it had been retained for 2 years plus 1 day. It was April 2020 and he first cheated with Frankie in May 2018 and the sex offender was in April 2019. I told them I was filing a police report and that probation would require a copy of it eventually. They said they would save the file and allowed me a thumb drive of both days to submit with my police report. Within a month the sex offender was locked up again. 2 down. I also filed a police report against the Frankie guy. The police said it was a relatively minor infraction but since it was across from a school playground and skate park they would follow up but there would be no jail time. I researched the hell out of Frankie and called him to confront him. He was smug and admitted to knowing about me the whole time. What he didn't know is that I had found out he had a job that required a security clearance and he had several judgments against him and collection agencies had been looking for him. I didn't know why they couldn't find him and just garnish his wages, but it ends up he was Hispanic and had 2 last names and was a junior, plus he frequently by his middle name Francisco, Frankie for short, so he got lost in the paperwork confusion. I sent a letter to the collection agencies providing his employer and current location and contact info, and then sent a copy of the police report about misdemeanor indecent exposure for which he pled guilty, and it was a fine with community service, not considered a sex crime. His wages did get garnished, but only for 2 paychecks because the misdemeanor was enough for him to lose his security clearance and get fired. 3 down. Then I contacted Ryan's family on his mother's side pretending to be him from his Facebook account, making sure they knew he had fucked his cousin. It spread through the family like wildfire, and soon his cousin was contacting me because he couldn't get a hold of Ryan to ask why he would expose what they did. I just laughed and said you shouldn't screw your cousins, especially when they're engaged, and that he'd messed around in my house, so now it was my turn for payback. 4 down. Lastly, I had already stopped payment, but since he was so close to finishing I was sure his family would bail him out and pay the university. Like I said, indecent exposure is usually a slap on the wrist type misdemeanor. However, I remembered some of the paperwork he signed to be a mandated reporter, that you could lose teaching certification for documented acts of moral turpitude. I sent a copy of both police reports from the parking lot with still shots from the security footage clearly showing Ryan's face to the school district he'd been student teaching in, and a copy to the Commission on Teacher Credentials. 5th and final down. Admittedly, I did all this out of anger, but he shattered my sense of self-worth and made me incredibly bitter and untrusting after years of being generous and supporting him. Everywhere I looked in the town I thought of Ryan and the cheating. I felt a terrible energy in my condo knowing it all happened there. I stayed 9 months and watched all 5 of their lives self-destruct. Then sold my condo, making a nice profit, and relocated to the PNW to start over. One thing that is sad is I found out just recently that his ex, whose fiancé broke up with him, ended up committing suicide several months after I moved. It is too bad that his family was so closed-minded to turn on their own son, but in the end, it's not my fault that he cheated on his fiancé by coming into my home at my fiancé's invitation to cheat. TLDR, I emotionally and financially supported my ex through college and his teacher credential program for over 7 years, only to discover he had cheated on me with 4 different guys, one of them the day after he graduated, and then occasionally for nearly 2 years in my home while I was at work. I took my revenge. My ex lost his career before it even started relationship, one AP, affair partner, lost his job and had bill collectors after him, another lost his fiancée and was kicked out, a third was humiliated when his entire family found out he had sex with his cousin, and the 4th was put in jail for violating probation. Lesson: don't cheat and deceive. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.